Today in Political Access, we're going to take a look at the presidential shifts between 1988 and 2020. So I've got my usual spreadsheet set up here. We've got the states in the first column, followed by the 1988 Democratic vote. That's Michael Dukakis. Followed by the 88 Republican vote. That is George H.W. Bush. Next column is the 2020 Democratic vote. That is Joe Biden. Followed by the Republican vote in 2020. That is Donald Trump. Then we have the Democratic shifts between those two elections, followed by the Republican shifts, and the last column is the net change between the two elections between the two parties. And I also have my usual shading in this column. The darkest colors are over a 10-point shift, and the lightest red and blues are going to be under 5-point shifts. I kept the shading the same, even though there's a lot of shifts here that are over 20 points. But for the consistency of my other videos in this series, I'm keeping the shading the same. And super brief background about this race. 1988, George H.W. Bush was the vice president under Ronald Reagan. He ran and he won for a third consecutive Republican victory. He got over 400 votes in the Electoral College. He got over 53% of the popular vote. Michael Dukakis, he got under 46% of the popular vote and a little over 100 electoral votes. So that is a resounding Republican victory, and there's a lot of blue states today that voted red back in 1988, and we're going to see some dramatic shifts as we get started here. So let's start in Alabama, and in 1988, Michael Dukakis got 39.9% of the vote. George H.W. Bush got 59.2%. Jump up to 2020, Joe Biden got 36.6%. Donald Trump got 62%. That's a net loss for the Democrats of 3.3% and a net gain of 2.8% for the Republicans and a total net change of 6.1% in favor of the Republicans. So now we can quickly go through the rest of these states. And the next state is Alaska, and that shifted double digits, 13.3% away from the Republicans and toward the Democrats. Arizona had a dramatic shift of 21.6% toward the Democrats. Arkansas went the other direction toward the Republicans by 13.4%. California had a huge shift, 32.7% toward the Democrats. Colorado, same direction by 21.3%. Connecticut as well by 25.1%. Delaware, another massive shift there by 31.3% toward the Democrats. There was a huge shift in Florida by 19.1%, also toward the Democrats. Georgia got 20.6% bluer. Hawaii also went to the left by just under 20 points. Idaho went back toward the Republicans by a modest 4.7%. Illinois went toward the Democrats by 19%. Indiana toward the Democrats as well, but by a much milder 4%. Iowa had a huge shift toward the Republicans. In 88, Dukakis won that state by about 10 points. Since then, it shifted 18.4% toward the Republicans. Kansas had a small 1.5-point shift toward the Republicans. Kentucky went 14.3% toward the Republicans. Louisiana went 8.4% toward the GOP. Now we've got some more big shifts here in Maine that went 20.5% toward the Democrats. Maryland as well by 30.1%, and Massachusetts by 25.7%. Michigan still double digits, 10.7% toward the Democrats. Minnesota curiously had almost no net change, only 0.1% toward the Democrats. Mississippi went away from the Republicans by 4.3%. Missouri went toward the Republicans by 11.5%, and Montana got redder by 10.4%. Nebraska had minimal change there, 1.9% toward the Democrats, and a lot of blue shifts here. Nevada, 23.4%, New Hampshire, 33.5%, New Jersey, 29.5%, New Mexico, 15.8%, New York 19.1%, and North Carolina by another 15 points. North Dakota had a big shift toward the Republicans by 20.3%. Ohio had a small shift toward the Democrats by 2.7%. Oklahoma went 16.5% toward the Republicans. Oregon went to the left by 11.4%. Pennsylvania 3.5% toward the Democrats. In Rhode Island, 9.1% toward the Democrats. South Carolina, 12.2% toward the Democrats. South Dakota, other direction by 19.8%. Tennessee had a red shift of 6.9%. Texas had a blue shift of an even 7%. Utah went even bluer by 13.7%. Vermont had the biggest shift for the Democrats by a massive 38.9%. Virginia also had a massive shift of 30.6% toward the Democrats. Washington went 17.6% toward the Democrats. In West Virginia, that had the biggest shift out of all the states, but it went toward the Republicans by a gigantic 43.6%. And in 88, that was back when West Virginia was solidly behind the Democrats. Next state is Wisconsin. That went 2.9% toward the Republicans. And finally, the last state is Wyoming. That went 20.8% away from the Democrats and toward the Republicans. So those are all the states, but I also have Washington, D.C. in here. Everybody knows it's deep blue, but it got even 18.4% bluer. So that's all the shifts. And if you want to help visualize all these changes, we could take all of this data and apply it to a map. Here it is. It's the same basic shading. The darkest colors are over 10-point shifts, and the very lightest colors, those would be the tilt margins of under 1%. There's not many of those on here, just Minnesota. So we have 4 levels of shading. I even have the congressional district shading in Maine, and in Nebraska, I just have the at-large data. So are there any takeaways from this? Yeah, there's probably a bunch. There was a lot of states that had 20 or more point shifts. Most of those were toward the Democrats, and most of those states we would consider to be solid blue states today, like the West Coast and much of the East Coast. But there's also some states on here like Alaska, Florida, and North Carolina. Those had big shifts toward the Democrats, but today they're still mostly red-leaning. And there's all kinds of neat shifts on here. I already mentioned Minnesota had almost zero change. So that's fascinating considering that state, which is considered blue today, is pretty much right where it was 3 decades ago. But a lot of the shifts are explained by it being a high point for the Republicans back in '88. Bush won the vast majority of the states. He was even semi-competitive in Dukakis' home state of Massachusetts, only losing it by single digits. And down south, you could see Mississippi and Alabama. They went in opposite directions, even though today both of those are pretty red states. Michigan and Wisconsin, they also went in opposite directions. And of course, West Virginia, blue state back in the day. These days, it's one of the reddest states, and it usually has one of, if not the biggest shift out of most of the political shift videos I've done. It's fun to go back and see what some of the margins were back in 1988. A lot of the states that Bush won, they would never come close to voting for a Republican these days. Maybe it changes in the future, but as of right now, it's amazing to see how Bush pretty much won in a landslide. And then later on in '92, he was unable to win a second term. So there's plenty more you could say about this, but I will leave it there. Let me know in the comments, what do you think about any of the shifts in any of these states? Let me know down below. On your way out, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Thank you for watching, and I will see you on the next video.